אפשר להשם צדיקים יבואו גבול זה.
Shabbat Shalom. Good morning. I'm very happy to see you. So yesterday I, as usual, prepared my Dvar Torah for today, and we are reading Parashat Beth, and we are going to read more about the plagues upon Egypt. And you know, as usually, I was prepared, but just few minutes before Shabbat, I learned that there was a terrorist attack in East Jerusalem. And I'm sorry if you didn't know that and you only learned it from me now, because I learned it only just really 1 minute before Shabbat, because I picked up my phone to turn it off before Shabbat, and this is when I saw it. So whatever I wrote before that for the sermon, it really didn't feel so relevant anymore. So today it's going to be a little bit different, because I'm just going to speak to you directly from my heart and without really a paper to read from. So in this Parsha, we read about the three final plagues, the three final punishments of Egypt, and these are locusts and darkness and the deaths of the firstborns. So this is a pretty terrifying Parsha on its own, and the previous one was also scary. And I would say they're pretty disturbing. I think it's normal to feel kind of distressed when you read them, because they're meant to, you know, cause this kind of feelings, because these were scary plagues. And our sages, of course, they also noticed it, and they were also bothered, and they tried to explain certain things to us to make sense of that. Because some of the verses in this parsha, they're really, really sad. And every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind her millstone, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And there will be a loud cry in Egypt, this cry that has never been heard before and never is going to happen again. So good news about that this kind of severe punishment is not going to happen again, according to the Torah. So that's something positive about it. But if we look at the verse itself, we see the punishment is coming from the Pharaoh, right, who has the most control in Egypt, to the slave girl. So slaves are like in the bottom of the society, really. And if you think about a female slave, that's even worse. That's just like lowest of the low. And like her baby, like that's it. Like you cannot get lower than that. So why is she punished if she's a slave? Like she doesn't have any control of the situation whatsoever. She could not release Israelites from the slavery, because she has no power to do it. So why is she being punished? And as I said, our sages, of course, also noticed that, and they try to give their answers. So I'm going to give you a couple of options of how to make sense of that. So Rashi, I would say in his Rashi style, gives a pretty simple explanation that slaves, though they were slaves, they were also bad towards Israelites. So they also rejoiced when Israelites suffered, so they were bad. That's why they also deserve the punishment. I think it's a pretty easy explanation, right? Another option is that God really shows control of everything with this final plague. So we have the plagues that are kind of progressing from the easiest one towards the most horrific one. So in the beginning, we remember there was like blood, water turned into blood, and frogs, and remember that the magicians of Egypt, they were also able to replicate it. So that was more like tricks. But as we progress, it's becoming more and more evident that God is in control of everything. So if in the beginning these were more like God was using natural, disasters, such as diseases or hail, then it becomes more and more supernatural. So if locust is still a natural kind of a disaster because it still happens till our day, then this darkness that fell onto Egypt is really something very different. We didn't really have explanation. It's said that this darkness was like thick, like it was, you could almost touch it. So it's not something normal. And then the death of the firstborn is even kind of more mysterious than that. So it's shown progressively that God not only controls the nature, but also controls the life of every human being. By the way, it's like just a kind of a note that sages also explain why there was like a plague of lice, because they were thought to be the most tiny creatures of the nature, saying that God controls from the tiniest they didn't know about like viruses and stuff, so from the tiniest animal to the end, to the life of a human being, and not like only life of Jews but life of Egyptians, right? Not only that this is God of Israel, but this is God of the whole world. So in this kind of a commentary, it means that this plagues, they came to show us the full control and power of God. Another explanation is why this happens is that later I read two verses like 11:5-6, and like in the verse 11:8, it's going to be said that Moshe tells to Pharaoh, "Then all these courtiers of yours shall come to me. They bow low and say, 'Depart, you and your people,'" saying that this final plague was to make kind of everyone let Jews go, meaning that these people were courtiers, the people of Pharaoh, and the normal Egyptians and the slave, they would all come to Pharaoh and say like, "Let them go." So that's why it was like a punishment for everyone. So like everyone feels this, and everyone would want Jews to leave, and no one would stop them. So this is another possible explanations. But I don't know if these answers are entirely satisfying to you. They might not be, because I think that the person with any sense of empathy still cannot help but feel sad for a slave girl whose baby died. And I think it's a real challenge for us. And here we kind of, I want to talk a little bit of how we again approach Torah and what kind of sense we can make of that. So there are different options again of like what paths can you choose. You can stick with sages, right? Just say what sages said in the past. They gave us all the answer. They said that the slaves were bad, that's why they deserved that. And like stick with that. And this is like a traditional approach. It was already explained everything. And this is one of the options, definitely. Then the second one would be maybe read the whole story as a metaphor. Like these things, they never happened. It's not a real story. It's not a description of what actually happened in Egypt, but rather it's a metaphor of God's power, of God's control, of God's care for Israelites, of like, the ideas of the strengths of God. So that can be comforting to a certain extent, thinking like, okay, no babies died that night. Nobody died. It's just a metaphor. Then we can see another option is to say that this kind of stories, they are response to a great injustice and suffering and oppression. So we can see it as a sort of a wishful thinking or a fantasy of like we were oppressed, our babies were killed. So we wish in our mind that they are oppressed and their babies are killed as a response to the suffering that we went through, because this kind of suffering makes people really terribly angry and insensitive. But our Torah, it doesn't actually say that whatever happened to Egyptians was a good thing, because the Torah says that this is not going to happen ever again. It doesn't say, and God said, well, if you are going to misbehave, I'm going to kill your babies every time. No, it doesn't say that. It says that it should not happen again. And I believe that the kind of responsibility of that not happening again, it lies on us as the equal partners of God in the covenant. So when I read yesterday this news about terrorist attack, I was really heartbroken, because not only it was terrorist attack, and no terrorist attack is justifiable because it's a terrorist attack. It's meant to cause terror, right? But this one, it was like how to make it like most painful to people, to make a terrorist attack in the synagogue, in the holy place, to kind of show that your God is not powerful, your God is not protecting you. In the sacred place, right, disrespecting the synagogue, on the sacred day, doing that on Shabbat, and to do it in the day of the International Remembrance Day of Holocaust, like to make it as worst as possible. And then I read among this that some of the leaders of the terrorists, they praised this attack. And that was just like, so why would people do that? This is so unjustifiable. This is like so just cruel. Like, and again, whatever, there are wars and there are, all kinds of tragedies in the world, but like to make it as painful as possible is as I can do. So I think that our Torah, it does show us these examples also of like maybe these cruel fantasies or these cruel pictures of like our enemies are punished, their babies are killed, they all get punished. But it doesn't teach us that we should emulate this kind of a practice. And it teaches us that no, this should never happen again. Even about the locusts, it says that this should never happen again. So all this punishment, they should not happen ever again. And we are responsible for that, because then after this story, when we get liberated and we're not slaves anymore, we make a covenant on the Mount Sinai, and we become equally responsible for what is going to happen in the world. So it's our obligation to never let this happen again. And I think that this is the beauty and the power and the truth of our Torah, because no matter what it tells us, it still teaches us about justice and compassion. And I hope and I pray that these teachings of the Torah, they will one day prevail in the world, and that world will strive to be just and not striving to cause as much pain as possible. So this is my Dvar Torah for today. And I want to wish you, despite of all, I want to wish you Shabbat Shalom, though it is very hard and it's sad. And I would like to, again, just, pay respect to the victims of the terrorist attack and to people who perished in Holocaust, and wish good life and strength and health to the survivors. And I'm wishing you a peaceful Shabbat as much as it's possible. And thank you for coming to the services today.